Hey there guys, I am the Six Machine and welcome back to another Heresy video, actually. Yep, we are back with another 30k themed video, and this one is particularly topical because of a certain model which was shown off at Warhammer Day. And you've guessed it, today we are, like we did with the Praetors and the Terminator Praetors, running down my list from worst to best of the Loyalist Primarchs, now that we have all 9 thanks to the recent showcase of the gorgeous Jaghatai Khan model. So without any further ado, let's dive straight into it, and coming in dead last at the number 9 spot, it's one you might not expect. Corax. Yes, Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard. But wait, you say, he's really badass and cool. Well, yeah, I agree with you, he is. Fluff-wise. I think he's great fluff-wise. But his model is just terrible. Now, I don't hugely hate any of the Loyalist Primarch models, but this one gets really, really close. It's just so awkward. I mean, I get what they were going for, but to me his pose just absolutely smacks of like shock or surprise. It's like he's landed, seen the Marine in front of him, and then had to jump back in shock as he wasn't expecting anyone to be there. It really doesn't give me the impression of him slamming down hard into the ground from the sky. For me, it looks like he's almost jumping backwards and away from the enemy, and to me that really doesn't feel the whole heroic, larger-than-life quality that you would expect from the Primarch models. I will give you, his wings do look fantastic, but again, aside from that, he just feels really rather plain to me. His armour isn't particularly noticeable or extravagant in any way, and his lightning claws are very ordinary and boring compared to some of the other Primarch weapons that we're going to see on this list. At number 8 we have one which many people might expect, and that is the very monopose, rather politician-like stance of Guilliman. Again, I totally get where they were going with him, but it's just dull. It's so boring, and I hate to say it, but it's such an ultramarine pose. And it might be inspiring in a way, I guess, but for me it just doesn't bring that image of action and purpose which I think the Primarchs should have. Even on Guilliman, I think he should be a bit more sort of action focused. I actually think his 40k model is far, far superior to this one, and shows him as this, yeah, he's a statesman and all that kind of stuff, but he is still a terrifying, brutal combat monster. I also really dislike the size of his gladius sword in this, and the power fist holding the sheath just looks kind of awkward. It's like a kid with boxing gloves holding a toy sword, if you get what I mean. And it just, the whole model really doesn't come together in an appealing way for me. In spot number 7 we have the very unfortunate Ferrus Manus, and now, don't go losing your head at him being placed so low. I know that some of you love him, but for me, I just really dislike the busyness on his model, and to be honest, on his base as well. On the model front, he has got all of those chains and bits of metal and piping dangling all over his armour, and it just looks so cluttered and messy. And although it fits thematically, I do also really, really hate his backpack. He looks to me like a massively oversized tech marine or apothecary with all of those mechadendrites and tools on his back. And then on the base front, there's just so many bodies around him, and I mean, I know all of the Primarchs have kinda crazy bases, but to me, Ferrus's base doesn't tell a story. It's just a mangled mess of bodies. And I know, we all know the story of Ferrus and what was happening in that particular scene that his display base is depicting, but the base itself doesn't lend that story to me. And when you compare it to all the other Primarchs, and especially ones like the Lion, who we will see later, there's just such a stronger focus on the narrative aspect and what is happening on that base compared to Ferrus. Now, controversially, we get to number 6, and yeah, I'm sorry about this one. For those of you that are going to hate me for it, I get it, but at number 6, it's Sanguinius. I'm sorry, I know. I really, really do not like his model diving in from the sky and being attached to that rock. It looks so awkward and so unnatural, and I really do think that Forge World needs to learn that As cool as it is, the idea of this Primarch diving in from the sky onto the enemy, that doesn't always translate well onto the model. His legs to me look so unbelievably awkward. He's like a deer who's just started to learn to walk. And I will admit he's better with the spear, but even then he just looks so uncomfortable and so unnatural. I love his armor, don't get me wrong, although I think the weird sort of like pelt, the lion, not lion, the leopard pelt on his back is a little bit out of place, but I do love his armor, although I will also say, and I know this is totally personal preference of course, but I really hate his face as well. I know it's meant to be very classically beautiful, but for me he looks more like he's part of the Habsburg dynasty than he does look like Michelangelo's David. In a similar vein to Guilliman, at number 5 we have Rogal Dorn, and now he is definitely better than Guilliman I think. If nothing else, he has much cooler looking armor and his weapon is just infinitely better as far as models go. I actually don't really dislike him, and I think it's fair to say that I actually genuinely love his golden armor and his pose is pretty decent. It again just feels a little bit static to me. And I know he's meant to be this stoic warrior looking over the battlements to help rebuild them and make them stronger, but just as a bit of personal preference, I love a bit of movement and action in the Primarch models. I will give him this, he does have the second coolest cloak out of all of the Primarchs, and maybe it's just the colour scheme they've gone for, but I adore the blood red that they have done for his scheme. It goes so well with that golden armour, and he does look every inch the Praetorian of Terror, so I will give them a lot of credit for that. He just doesn't quite reach the top tiers of my Primarch list for a few small reasons, like his relatively static stance. At number 4 we have the never dying himself, the mighty Vulkan, and I actually could imagine a lot of people placing him a lot lower down in their lists compared to me, and from a certain aspect I get that. His base is, I will admit, a tad boring, and his pose isn't the most dynamic of all the Primarchs, but what Vulkan lacks in those categories, he makes up for in just pure, unadulterated power. And I love the heft and the weight that he has behind that hammer. It's just so strong and so much more powerful than compared to say like Ferrus with his hammer. You can really tell that he is swinging it down to just utterly mulch some enemy traitors into pulp. I also really rate this model because of the detail on his armor. I love the scales which make up his cloak and the shoulder pad made from that lizard skull. It just really does fit his whole theme so well. And what I also think that this model in particular does better than any other Primarch is his face. He looks so full of rage and so furious, and he doesn't have that awkward derpy looking face that so many of the other Primarch models have. He is full of intent and focus, and in my mind that really does do a lot to help sell the mini. So those are my number 9 to number 4, and now we are into the really strong contenders. And at number 3 we have the wolf himself, Leman Russ. And it was actually quite close between the wolf and Vulkan for 3rd and 4th spot respectively, but the wolf did just edge him out thanks to that awesome just about to jump off the outcrop pose that he has going for him. And you know, take a look at this, GW and Forge World, show them just about to jump, not mid jump or mid in the air. It just looks so much more natural and so much more menacing. When it comes to Leman Russ, I just adore his overall pose. His dual wielding of the sword and the axe, and even the shield on his back with all those intricate runes and designs is just so Vilka Fenrica, which I absolutely love. And I think ever since Dan Abnett kind of mixed up the Space Wolves lore over the course of the Heresy books, I have loved the identity and the sort of feel and the style that the Space Wolves have had through the Heresy series. I think it is so different to what everyone was expecting, and it just really does work with their outlook on sort of things like the Warp and the other legions and just the Great Crusade as you read the series. And for me, Leman Russ just 100% exemplifies that overall feel. And then on top of that, even his base is I mean, it's not crazy, it doesn't have loads and loads going on, but it shows his speed and it shows his ferocity, as if he's, running up it, presumably just about to jump into the fray and start swinging his weapons around to bisect dozens of enemies in half. And I really do appreciate that. It's just such a simple thing, but that movement on that ramp gives you such a narrative story to the model, and it really, really does work well for him. So now we're on to number 2, and this was really hard because both of these models just blow me away whenever I look at them. And I really, really wish I could put them both at the number 1 spot, I really do, but I can't, I have to choose. So in the number 2 spot of my favourite Primarchs, it's the Khan. And I know, I'm a Dark Angels fanboy, whatever. I do think, honestly, the Khan is just not quite as good as the Lion. But to give him his credit, I love the sword the Khan has. It's so stylized and cool. I love his face. Again, it looks brilliant and is totally in fitting with how I expect Jaghatai to look. It isn't derpy in the slightest. His armor is, massively ostentatious and over the top, but again, it fits with how you imagine that Primarch to be. I love the pattern design running down his cloak and across his backpack. I love the top knot. It all just comes together so brilliantly in his model. I think the only flaw for him, in my opinion, is that his base is a bit lacking. It is honestly a little bit boring. But despite that, the overall model and everything that makes up Jaghatai Khan is just mind-blowingly gorgeous. So that just leaves our number 1 spot. And yes, it is indeed my favourite Primarch, the one, the only, Lionel Jonson. And what can you say about the Lion's model? He is, like the Dark Angels Praetors, just every inch a Knight of Old, every inch a Knight of Caliban. His armour is so simple, but it oozes so much presence and menace and mythology. The gilded panelled leg armour, the tabard, his cloak, which, as you may have guessed, is by far the best cloak out of any Primarch, and even both of his swords are just glorious, although personally I do prefer the Lion sword. And then we get to his head options, and both of them are just chef's kiss, Forge World. Really, really, really. The bareheaded one is just so full of rage and anger, and he's just so focused, whilst conversely, when he has the helmet on, it's as though he just suddenly has become a blank. There's no emotion, no mercy, just those dark slits where his eyes are. It's almost like an executioner's look, and I just absolutely adore it. And even then, that isn't all. Then we move on to his pose. And yes, while it's not as over the top as some of the other Primarchs, it just works so well because it is so jam-packed with poise and so full of determination. I've never seen a model in all of my years of playing Warhammer or Warhammer Fantasy or whatever that had a pose that was so fitting with how my mind saw the character in the lore. Because the Lion, he doesn't need to move with all the speed that someone like Leman Russ does. He's just so measured. He knows exactly how hard he needs to swing his sword to cut that poor Night Lord in half, and he isn't going to overdo it. He isn't going to waste energy for no reason. It's just so clinical, so methodical, and yet despite that apparent lack of effort, with the cloak billowing out the way it does on the other side, you can tell how much force and how much speed and how much power really is going into that swing as he brings it down. And then even the display base is incredible. Sure, maybe it's a tad over the top with the number of bodies, but again, it just really shows you how utterly brutal and uncompromising and unrelenting the Lion is when he gets into combat, and I absolutely love every single element of this model. It is exactly how, in my mind, I see the Lion. So there we go, that is my list of the Loyalist Primarchs from worst to best. But what do you think of my list? Is it similar to yours, or is your order totally different? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.